hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
All right, everybody, welcome back to The Hybrid. I'm Erik Gunderson, here as always with Shawn Collins. Today, we're joined by Christina Dempsey from the California Department of Cannabis Control. So this is a fun one for us because when people talk about cannabis regulation, California is almost always part of that conversation. It's the largest cannabis market in the country, and it has one of the longest cannabis histories. So for today, we'll start with Christina's background, how she got into this work. We'll talk about what's new in California, including incorporating AI into their oversight model. Also, coming off of Canada last week, we'll continue the conversation around rescheduling, interstate commerce, and how California is preparing for both. And then lastly, since Shawn and I never got to it in our last episode, we're going to bring back the Regulator Draft. It's where you build a new cannabis market from scratch. What are the most important policies to get right? Not the flashiest, not the most politically popular. What are the foundational policies that determine whether a market can actually function, protect consumers, and maintain public trust? So quick open today. Before we go to our guest, Christina, as always, go to my co-host and friend, Shawn Collins. Sir, how are you? We have a new background. What's going on?
I'm good. Thanks for calling me your friend. I feel, I don't know, I feel seen. Thank you. That's really great.
I felt obligated because before we hit record, just so everybody knows, Shawn called me his friend. So it was just, I felt like I was obligated to call him my friend.
You have any proof to that? I'm good. Thank you for asking. Thanks for your concern. New background. Yeah, I'm in a hotel room. So for the love of the game, I packed a microphone in my carry-on. And I think I now have 3 pairs of headphones. I have these, the earbuds, and airplane headphones. So I overpacked for a trip. But I'm in Austin, Texas at the Hemp Beverage Expo. Was also at Ignite in Chicago this week. And previous to that was in Oklahoma with you folks. So June has been a busy travel week, or travel month, I should say.
World traveler here.
Yep, I miss my family. That's so if they're listening, I'm sorry, I love you.
They have to tune in the podcast to see your face.
Yeah. Daddy loves you. Yeah, happy birthday. Sorry.
I love that you have to say if they're listening, because you're not even sure
For
if
sure.
they are.
The only time they typically listen is when I'm editing the podcast, and my daughter will be like, "That's Daddy." I'm like, "That you don't want to listen to that. Uncle Erik is not going to be nice to me." So,
well, I mean, that's a perfect segue to introduce and bring on our guest, Christina Dempsey from California. She's been with that agency for, I mean, many years now. I think you were around when Shawn and I were around. You left, you came back, just couldn't get enough of it. So first of all, thank you for taking a little bit of time to have this conversation with us. I will say you're the second regulator that we've had on. You followed the great Adria Berry, Director Berry from Oklahoma a few weeks ago. That episode did fantastic. So expecting the same thing out of you, Christina. But jumping in, just to give people a sense, I think it's a good place to start. Can you let our listeners know, let me and Shawn know exactly what you're doing today at the DCC?
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me on. Adria's episode was fantastic, and I do feel like I have very big shoes to fill. And I'm not sure I'm going to live up to her example, but I will do my best. So I have been working on cannabis for the state of California for a long time now. It's been since 2017 with a brief hiatus where I left and came back. I think there's sort of waves of regulators that leave every so often. And I think I'm the only one who has gone back after some time being out. My current role is that I'm the Deputy Director of Government Affairs, which means that I am the department's liaison to elected officials and to government partners at the local, state, and federal levels. So a huge portion of my work is working with the state legislature on bills, pending legislation, statutory issues, everything else, including budget and hearings and issues of oversight that they are interested in. And then a newer portion of our work has been thinking about how we engage more at the federal level with our our congressional representatives. And really that is about just giving them basic information on cannabis and hemp and helping them understand the issues that they are being advocated on by stakeholders.
So, largest cannabis market in the country, and you are, I won't say solely responsible, but it seems like you're probably the main person within the agency to navigate, negotiate, communicate with probably two of the most important, and I will say, I don't speak for Christina here, two of the most difficult stakeholder groups to work with, specifically in cannabis. So I got to imagine that is just full of challenges and fun.
Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah.
Here's what we have in store for you. That's incredible.
I'll say it's fun. The legislature in particular, I think legislatures across the country, it's full of elected officials that have their own agendas and are dealing with their own stakeholders. A lot of the people that I spend time with in the legislature are staffers who have been around for a while, and they're sort of the continuity in the legislature. And some of those staffers have been around as long as I have and have been working on these issues as long as I have and have very deep knowledge. And a lot of them come to it and they're like, I just got cannabis in my portfolio. What do I need to know? And they are public servants just like we are. So they look at it from a very different perspective, but it's about relationship building and making sure that we all are understanding things the same way.
I'm glad you actually brought up the staffers too, because one of the things I think about with California is the issue of term limits in the legislature and how, as someone in your role, that turnover means you're doing a lot of education, a lot of introduction, but the staff point is a really great one that especially folks that are listening to the podcast, whether they be other regulators or even industry side, to know that sometimes people feel like, oh, they pawned me off on a staffer, and as former legislative staffers ourselves, Erik and I, we were the ones on the receiving end of those inquiries, those agency outreach, but also the stakeholder outreach. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because that's sometimes a good thing, is that consistency and that level of awareness and that institutional knowledge, because many folks inside the agencies like yourself, you're making those introductions, but you're also trying to maintain those relationships. And a lot of this is built on credibility, and you earn credibility over time through rounds of engagement and sometimes disagreement, but also, to Erik's point, negotiation. And so how is it? I guess I really want to talk about, you left briefly, but having come back in, thank you for your service, by the way, as fellow public servants that would argue that it is indeed a calling. That transition out and then back in, what sort of perspective or insights, or I'm sure, how refreshing was it to take a bit of a breather? And you didn't leave cannabis policy either, which I want to sort of mention, but that transition back in, how has it been? But also, maybe having come back in, what sort of insights are you bringing back to the role now that maybe you didn't have before, or maybe you appreciate differently or see differently nowadays?
Yeah. I guess let me talk about why I left in the first place. I was so burnt out. And I had been, so from 2017 up until I decided to leave in late 2022. We had gone through the launch of the market. We had managed the Valley health crisis. We had gone through the consolidation of our 3 programs into forming the department, planning for standing up a department, had been on that first executive team for the department. And I was just so tired. These are not jobs. I don't think this is unique to California. I think this is why there's such a shelf life on cannabis regulators. These are not 40-hour-a-week jobs. These are like 50, 60 plus with phone calls on the weekend and at night. And, I can't tell you how many times I've answered the phone where I'm like, sorry, my kids are in the car, but let's chat really quick. And then, we can talk more later.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of a lot. I had twins that were born in 2021. And so it's a lot of work to have babies and much less few babies. And then to be doing this crazy job that I just got to the point where I was so tired that I knew I wasn't giving it what I needed to give it. And so that's why I walked away. And I got rest. I mean, that was the best thing I could have.
I only had twins. I had rest. Yeah.
I left and I took a nap. Yeah. Sounds right.
Yeah. I mean, like when you're that burnt out, it is really hard to see the forest from the trees. You're just trying to address the one thing that's in front of you at a time because you're kind of in a survival mode. And that's really where I was. And so leaving gave me my perspective back to some degree because I had rest. I had the ability to look at things with a fresh set of eyes. I did some consulting work, and a important thing to me was I didn't do any work with the industry. So I worked with government organizations and I worked with academic organizations, but still on cannabis. So that even was a different perspective on the same issues that we were working on. And I had been out for about a year when I decided, okay, I'm rested and I think I'm ready to go back. And luckily, when I said that to Nicole Elliott and other leadership at the state, all I got was yes, let's figure out how to make this happen. And so got the opportunity to come back in this role.
I was going to make a joke about you going back and us having to do some psychological testing on you because who is crazy enough to want that pain again? But it would be a little disingenuous only because I like, Shawn, I know you've had those thoughts too, and you may not like share them freely, but I've had those thoughts as well. Like you kind of miss it. And if you're not looking for it back in cannabis, you're trying to recreate that environment with a new position, which I just don't think exists. So I was going to make that joke. I'm going to shelve it because I think I totally get it and understand it. You just kind of
probably
missing
wasn't
that
funny
excitement
either.
No, it would have been fantastic. But I want to take
You, Erik, were one of the first people that I told that I was going back when I got the pretty much sign off from the governor's office that this is going to
Okay.
Yeah,
All
listen,
right.
us
And
government.
Yeah, I remember you telling me I'm a little jealous.
Did I? Yeah, see,
Yes.
I wouldn't be able to pull it off. A little jealous. I mean, us government consultants, I think we checked in with each other every once in a while. We probably weren't as close as we should have been or like more collaborative, but
Do you want me to sign off? Like, is this, do you want me, I can, sorry to eavesdrop on your conversation here.
yeah, I mean, it's like any other job, good days and bad days. I probably was having a bad day. I was like, you know what? It doesn't sound that crazy to go back to state government.
It isn't. It's not crazy.
I know.
I actually, to Erik's point, I think I'm jealous to a degree, but I also really have a deep appreciation for the work that you've done since returning, but also in the interim. You know, I think the fact you mentioned you went into your work was really policy centric, which is where I see myself a lot as far as the intersection of policy and politics and what's possible, what's best, what's sort of that hybrid in there. But I think the fact that government needs folks thinking creatively, strategically like you do. So I just want to acknowledge I have a deep respect for the work that you did and have done and do today at DCC, but also even in that interim phase, you were adding to the conversation in a much broader reach. And I'm glad that we had a chance to collaborate a little bit on that interim phase. But just as someone who cares deeply about policy and the work that regulators do, I'm much more comfortable knowing that you're in the driver's seat, passenger seat, but you're inside the government vehicle at this point. So welcome back, but also thank you. So, which, by the way, no one ever calls to say thank you to a regulator. So let that be the one. So bookmark it.
Well, and you know what? After I left, when I was working on my first consulting project, actually with camera, and there was something that I did that Jillian called me, and she was like, "Thank you, whatever Excel spreadsheet or something that I had put together." She was like, "This is so great, and I'm so happy that we have this." And I cried because I was like, no one said thank you to me in years. And like just hearing those words out of someone's mouth was just enough that I was, over the edge.
High praise coming from Jillian too. So
must have been a hell of a Excel worksheet.
There were pivot tables.
Yeah, dude, I love a good spreadsheet. So anyway,
weird that we don't have a sponsor yet. Yeah, I wonder why. Yeah, we're talking about Excel.
Let's go back even further a little bit here. I always find it interesting. And actually the answer to this is starting to change the longer we go on. So like, I think the three of us have been in it long enough where when we ask people, how did you get into cannabis? It was always like, I never tried to get into cannabis, but more and more the regular, I applied for the job. I thought it would be super interesting. I wanted to learn more about cannabis, but I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but I think you were probably in the camp that Shawn and I and many of our older former colleagues or like coming to the end of their shelf life colleagues were kind of thrust into it, where it was just a coincidence, or it was just a strange series of events that led to it. So you said you got started in 2017, but what were the series of events that led up to Christina Dempsey being a cannabis policy guru?
Yeah. So my undergrad degree was in corporate risk management, and my early career was in crisis PR and community outreach type of projects. And I moved to California in 2017, and I was applying for positions at the Department of Public Health more because it was on the same block as my apartment
Oh
complex, and I
yeah.
wanted the commute of
Yeah. Oh
being able to
yeah.
walk down the street.
Smart.
But it happened to be at the same time that they were standing up their cannabis program, to regulate manufacturers and manufactured product and packaging and labeling. And so the first phone call that I got in applying for jobs was from that program for an outreach position. And so I started out by serving as one of the public facing representatives of the program. And so my job was really going out into the public, speaking on panels, holding workshops, fielding phone calls, emails, just helping businesses understand the new regulations and the expectations of the program, and then also bringing their questions and concerns back to the team for consideration. And so I became sort of this in between on all of these policy issues. And I loved policy. I mean, it was not something that I had been exposed to in college, in my early career work, but seeing how policy affects people in real time, thinking about how to make it workable, for both the agency's goals and also, like implementable by a business. I just fell in love with policy work. So after that, I transitioned into a policy leadership role, and really have been on the policy side since then.
Can you talk a little bit, because it sounds like from their intro was with that California has a history of evolution on the regulatory structure, and I think it sounds like you lived it, and you obviously therefore have a lot of deep insight into it. But in those early days when it was broken into three separate agencies, or sort of like the responsibility was spread amongst a variety of agencies, what level of coordination happened amongst those agencies? Because I'm sure as a licensee or as an operator, or even as a government, like a local government, et cetera, navigating the bureaucracy, I'm sure, was uh, if not a challenge, an education for them around whose responsibility. But there's also a bit of like a not my responsibility, it's theirs, and but that's true for the folks inside the agency as well. Where I'm sure if you're sitting on a panel, you might be catching flack for the retail side of things or the cultivation side of things. How much of that went back to your agency, but then out to the others, and living through that evolution? I'm sure logically it would suggest it's probably better today as far as coordination, but um, what has been your experience in seeing that exercise through? Because for those bureaucrats listening, like that's a lot of work for the inside the agency too.
Yeah, yeah. I've had a lot of conversations with states that have set their programs up in this sort of like disjointed way among different state departments or state agencies. And then, obviously we now are together. So the way that we started was as three separate regulatory programs. So manufacturing was regulated by the Department of Public Health, cultivation was regulated by the Department of Food and Agriculture, and then everything else, sort of all of the consumer facing and consumer services type of regulation, was under the Department of Consumer Affairs. And it was set up that way intentionally because the governor at the time, Governor Jerry Brown, wanted to be able to draw on the expertise of those existing departments. So, of course, food and ag, you already have agricultural inspectors. You have people who deeply understand farming. And so that cultivation program for cannabis was able to, their inspectors were receiving training from people who did that in other agricultural sectors, and instilled with that mindset. Manufacturing was placed at the Department of Public Health because that's where food inspection is. In California. And it was very helpful in getting the programs up and running. There were resources that we could rely on that we wouldn't have had if we were, out on an island on our own. but it was really challenging to coordinate among 3 programs that were under 3 separate departments, under 3 separate agencies. And so, like, any sort of bureaucratic challenge that you have working in government was multiplied by 3 at least, if not like 4 or 5, because you were not just 3 separate programs. You were 3 separate programs under 3 different departments with 3 different department directors with 3 different agency secretaries and all of the staff in between. So the 3 programs met regularly. We would meet to talk about regulations. We would meet to talk about inspections. We had a lot of sites where they were businesses that held multiple licenses, that sometimes those licenses were spread across the programs. And so we would talk about both inspection sort of best practices, but also when there was some sort of an enforcement disciplinary issue, how to best address it, which of the 3 programs was the best one to address whatever the issue was. But it was very challenging for businesses because the other thing that happened there is that those 3 programs set up 3 different licensing systems. They had, 3 sets of staff. When local governments were trying to coordinate, they were coordinating with 3 different programs. And licensees were interacting with people across the programs. And when we would go out and we would do panels, for example, usually our panels it was me from public health, and then someone from Food and Ag, and someone from the Bureau of Cannabis Control, which was under our Consumer Affairs Department. And so, like, there was a little bit of a flow there, but if someone was missing and a question came up about their area, you were sort of in this place where you couldn't really answer it because you couldn't speak to it because it wasn't your program. And so I think it left a lot of gaps where, we were all trying to stay within our scope and not creep into the other programs and not try and speak for them in a way that could get licensees turned around and result in them making a decision that might not be good for their business because we're not the ones who should be speaking to it, but also like created these gaps of like there were things that didn't nicely fit into one of the 3 buckets, and so you end up in a place where it's like, I don't know who handles this. And so in 2020, January of 2020, the governor announced, Governor Newsom then, announced that he was merging the 3 programs. It was part of his budget. 3 months later, it was COVID, and so it got put off for a year, and so it became effective in 2021. But that was really, we gained a lot of efficiencies and expertise by being set up the way we were. But that was the natural transition for, okay, now we need to close these gaps.
That whole last 5 minutes just gave me big anxiety just thinking about that. I was always like the centralized, like I want control of everything because when you're running an agency, it helps with planning, it helps with predictability, it helps and if anything gets outside of your control is what would give me, anyway, that just
Would
gave
it
me
burn you out such that maybe you would need a
Heart-
breather in between?
palpitations. Yes. So I think a good question for a segue into the next more California specific. I've always viewed California as a little bit of an outlier with state cannabis programs. I was always like, the simpler, the better. I say the word predictability a lot because like there needs to be predictability in the system from the regulator to the stakeholders. There needs to be a simple approach so everybody understands laws and rules and they understand expectations from regulators, all that stuff. And I always thought California was just bigger and more complex. And I always wondered, like, I wonder why they did it that way. But then you're like, they're just doing it the California way. Like, who am I to say from little old Maine, like what works and what doesn't work in California? But so me as the outsider viewing California is kind of an outlier from a lot of different cannabis programs. Do you, as somebody that works in the DCC for the California Cannabis Agency, see it the same way? Like we are a little bit of an outlier from some of our other colleagues' programs where they're talking about Maine, Massachusetts, Maryland, Florida, I guess Oklahoma, Michigan, whatever it may be, or is it just like, no, we're just one of the crew? And I'm not trying to like put you in an uncomfortable position here or isolate you. I think everybody loves all of their friends and colleagues from California, but it's just, I've always viewed you guys as this like kind of almost different thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are. And the most obvious difference that California has as compared to any other state is scale. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we
No one's
are,
going to argue that. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, we have 8,000 licenses, and that's about 5,000 unique businesses. So that's many times larger than most state markets. And in some respects, that is closer in scale to Canada than it is to any other US state. So, I mean, like that alone means that policies that work in other states do not always translate well into California. So, like, the best example of this is probably this year we've been talking to the legislature quite a bit about labeling that's attractive to children. And last year in an audit, the state auditor's office said, you should just implement pre-review of labels. And we have, in our best estimates, we have something like 90,000 unique products on the market right now with unique labels. And, the comparison that often gets made when talking about a pre-review process is Oregon. And, like, why don't you do a pre-review process like Oregon has? But to do a pre-review process for 90,000 labels that are constantly changing does not work here. I mean, it would cost at least $10 million a year to implement that and probably be so slow as to impede businesses. And that makes it really challenging to scale to California some of the smaller programs that are very effective in other states, but just would not work here. But with that said, there are things that I think CAMRA is the most amazing resource for this. I mean, we talk to other states all the time about, how are you setting up these certain things in your reference lab? And when you implemented this policy, what were the results of it? Like, there are a lot of lessons that we can still learn from each other. We just have to think about things in a much bigger way than I think most states do.
Which is a really great pivot to the labeling piece, because we did an element of that in Massachusetts, which was sort of I guess, a voluntary, you could submit your label for review, which is kind of like a bit of a hall pass to an extent, but it wasn't required. And, but that also became another queue that we had to manage. And it was, again, it was the licensing issues and the inspections and renewals. And I kept reminding commissioners of, like, why are renewals taking so long? It's like every time that you issue a new license at every single meeting, that's next year's renewal pool. And so just keep that in mind, that we issue annual licenses and those things sort of come up. And then for every license, there's going to be a number of agents that have to get registered. Like every new approval creates a new sets of tasks for us to then manage. But it's really helpful context to have the scale in mind about 90,000 SKUs, and for listeners too. Like, that's, if you think about what you walk into for a dispensary and you see sort of the menu that's been curated for you, every grape gummy and apple gummy has a separate label. And so think about that in the context of SKUs. Every strain and every all of that is something that someone is regulating and someone is overseeing. And so it sounds like you guys doing some really interesting things by leveraging technology. And I'm fascinated by it, just from someone that is kind of curious. I think the efficiencies are there, but also the, like, what does the future look like, and how can regulators? I'm really excited to see that you guys are embracing technology and trying to find those efficiencies. And obviously, I would love to probe a bit about sort of when something happens on the back end, what's the sort of the plan for that, and what can folks expect? But it sounds like you're using AI to an extent to potentially look at some of those labels, and I guess the efficiency it might bring to operators, but also maybe to your colleagues in the agency too. So can you educate us on that, and also maybe give us a sense of what the internal process looks like to deploy something like that? Because I'm sure it's a lot of questions about, can we trust this thing, and what leverage does it give us, but what risk does it bring?
Yeah. Yeah. So we just, while CAMRA was happening, launched publicly. We're calling it the Cannabis Product Image Analyzer, and it is an AI tool that you can upload the picture of a label, either a picture that you're taking off of your iPhone, or like a graphic design file. And it will do an assessment as compared to the regulations of that label design, and give you this is likely compliant, or this is likely not, with some explanation of why. And this started in development last year. There's a big effort in California state government to think about how AI can help enhance our work, and so it was really on the back of some of that. But one of the biggest challenges in labeling, that is determining what labeling is attractive to children, is that it is design. It is subjective. It is
Exactly.
it is really hard to say definitively this thing is always attractive to children and this thing is always not, because it really exists on a spectrum. Um, and for us, one of the challenges in like being able to explain what is attractive to children and having licensees also have a shared understanding is that our regulations prohibit cartoons. And cartoons, I actually think, is a great example of the subjectivity. When you say cartoons, that seems pretty obvious, like a Mickey Mouse or
Right.
any of those types of children's cartoons. But actually, what is the difference between a cartoon and an illustration? Where do you draw the line between something that is more cartoony in the way that like you think of for a child, and not this thing that is also a fictional, some sort of depiction that is made more for an adult. And so there's so much subjectivity in this assessment. And one of the real challenges that we have is that because this market is large, it does require some self-policing. We do not always want to be the ones who are coming in after the fact and then ordering a recall. We want licensees to be thinking about this ahead of time and stopping things from going to market that are the truly questionable things. But what are those things? So we started to think about what it would mean to use AI and the emerging tools that we have access to these days to do some sort of an assessment that could give you a little bit of a gauge and make it a little bit less subjective. And so we've gone through a lot of different versions of this tool. It's just based on, it has ChatGPT as its backend large language model. It is really a lot of effort into prompt engineering more than it is building out some massive database on the back end. And it is we uploaded into this prompt all of our regulations that are applicable here and a little bit of explanation of what that means. And then the tool does a quick assessment on that. We've gone through several versions of that prompt too in getting to the place that we're in now, and quite a bit of testing, first with a small group of staff, then with inspection staff, and now have gotten to the place where we feel confident enough in this tool that it's useful for licensees, which is why we released it. But it's basically just doing an assessment of the design as compared to the regulations and giving you a gauge of where you are on that. It's very useful for us for design elements that are things that are marketed to youth but that are not something that a 30 or 40-year-old might be aware of. So it'll catch things that are very popular with kids that unless you have firsthand experience with it, you might not know. And then it also gives you sort of like this overview of the whole label. Like it really is taking into account all of the elements that are in there.
You actually answered one of my questions there. Because I was going to say, if I'm a licensee, what's stopping me from just taking my label and running it through ChatGPT without having this specific product? But you said you guys refined and developed what that prompt is, not just with the regulations and laws, but kind of how do we interpret those as an agency? And you got feedback from different people within the office. And over time you came to some place that you're comfortable with. And I love how you said, I was waiting for it. It spits out likely compliant or likely non-compliant. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of legalese in there as well as you go through it, but it's kind of interesting because like it helps motivate folks to do it, trying to get some of that voluntary compliance. I mean, it maybe gets them just one step closer to actually using the product versus their free will using it in ChatGPT on their own, which I think that's a fabulous idea. And I was going to, do we have any, it sounds like it's only been up and running for what, 7 days now, 8 days now. Is there any early feedback? Is it being used? You must have some of those metrics.
Yeah. So yes, it's being used. So within the first 24 hours, we had something like 400 visits to the website with submissions into it. Within a couple of days, we had something like 1,500 different submissions into it. So again, thinking about the scale of California, that's
Yeah.
kind of a wild amount for a tool that we have not gone out and publicized, and like this was not released in a press release. This was put into a licensee email, and within a couple of days, there were 1,500 submissions through the tool. And so, yes, we are seeing people use it. We're calling this a beta test because we really want to understand how licensees are using it, where they're finding it helpful or not helpful, and we expect to continue refining it over time. And there is a component, there are a lot of disclosures on the website. I mean, this speaks to the likely compliant, likely not compliant, but this is not the agency determination. That's not even how we're using it internally. We use it as a first pass, but then there is a team of humans that actually reviews the label and reviews the outputs of this tool and makes a real assessment internally for our process. But so, there are a lot of caveats to this tool, but what we hope is that it gives them a useful indicator. And there is a survey also on the website where you can tell us what you find useful or not about it. And we haven't really gotten very many feedback submissions through that, other than, sort of the typical like, I don't like AI, and so I don't know about this tool at all, which I think speaks to more of a broad societal perception of AI more than the utility of the tool.
Pass that along to a different agency.
My favorite part in thinking about this is as you're training and developing what that prompt looks like, just the thought that in there somebody wrote, "You're a 7-year-old kid. You love candy. If you saw this, would you want it?" And you're like, that's actually in there. That's incredible.
Some adults do watch Bluey. Yeah, I think
Bluey feels much more marketed to a child, but
sure?
One of the debates in the legislature this year has been over root beer. Is root beer inherently something that is attractive to children? That has spawned so much debate within our agency about
that's crazy.
Soda.
You know what? This is why California gets a bad rap.
Bargs has bite. Yeah.
My mother loves root beer.
It does speak to like what is the challenge of something that's attractive to children. There's some fantastic research coming out of this one researcher who's based in San Francisco, Alyssa Payden, who actually puts specific design elements in front of youth to see what they are more often picking versus another, and like really measures specific design elements. But so much of what is quote unquote attractive to youth in policymaking comes down to what you feel like is childlike. And that's really challenging in an industry where it has a little bit of immaturity in the culture, and uses things that you might think of as childlike, but actually there's no research that a child is going to specifically be attracted to this one design element just because it's on there. And so teasing out what is the evidence base of this one element that we think is attractive to youth versus like what is the feelings base of this is really hard. And it makes a lot of the debates challenging because you trigger a lot of the feelings that people have more than what the evidence base is.
I think that speaks a lot to where cannabis is and is not as an industry today from a maturity standpoint. When I say maturity, I don't mean like in a juvenile or like immature. It's more of like the industry as it grows. Exactly. And I think if we were to zoom out in the long lens of cannabis policy, this is still very early days. And a lot of things are still getting sorted out. And I think a lot of these are first impression cases too. Like what is appealing to children is a really important conversation to have, but we're in the midst of it today and we haven't settled it. And it's also, and it sounds like you're thinking about this the same way, which is it's an evolution where, like you said, the prompt needs to get refined. Your rules might get refined over time. But I'm also glad you touched on the industry itself has a responsibility here as well. And it's not just to look to regulators to say like, can I do this? Yes or no. I think they need to reflect a bit and say, should I do this? Yes or no? And that conversation first, at least what I am excited to see your agency doing is giving them a tool that they can then leverage to ask that question before coming to the regulator to say, Bluey's not appealing to, like, I'm being dramatic about that, but I think there's a lot of value in giving it. One, it helps, I'm sure, your staff at the agency field fewer phone calls, and if it can triage some of that, I think that's a wonderful asset for the folks in your team to have. But if it's also a bit of a self-medicating opportunity to at least gut check what does the reasonable child standard think about this from a legal context. But I think it's important that we have these conversations. They're necessary conversations to have, and we were always going to have them. And so I think for people to think like, here we go again, I've got this compliance, heavy burden. You also have the heavy obligation and responsibility to, again, just be mature adults about, if you want regulators and policymakers to take you seriously, act it. And I think, again, you're giving folks a tool to self-medicate, which is a service, frankly, that the industry should lean into. So Erik's going to criticize me for getting on a soapbox.
100%. Christina, I promise you, he's going to make a reel out of that right there.
You know what I'm not making a reel out of? The little love fest that went on early in this podcast about, oh, Erik, you were the first one I called. Oh,
yeah. Well,
yeah. Okay. Well,
I called him. We were sitting next to each other at a conference. We were at the UNLV, the December event that they had. And that morning,
I was at that one.
My governor's office appointment interview, which is why when I came back to the table, I was like,
no, I was at that conference. Yeah.
Shawn, why do so many California regulators don't like you? I don't understand.
Weird. Okay. Well,
weird.
You know what I'm not clipping again?
All right. So this may be a segue into the next topic we're talking about, but it's not. It doesn't necessarily have to be. But aside from the AI and everything that's happening in the world, what is California? What is the agency focused on now? What are your priorities as you continue to grow, as you continue to mature? I mean, those priorities shift from not even year to year to year. It can be from quarter to quarter to quarter. So I'm just interested in what you guys what are you working on?
Yeah. So we have a new director this year. So our first director, who was the governor's longtime cannabis policy advisor, Nicole Elliott, left at the end of last year. And our new director is Clint Killam. He's fantastic. And so you guys should think about having him on too. But he
probably doesn't like me.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't like Shawn. We already know that. We're not even going to try.
I'll do a warm handoff to you.
There you go.
That's not going to help.
But he has set 4 strategic priorities for the department. And so all of our work is sort of centering around how can we move forward in these 4 places. So it's trusted and safe product, sustained pressure on the illicit market, consumer access and awareness, and reducing friction for licensees, with the caveat that it is without compromising consumer trust and safety. So a lot of our work this year, and this is part of our 5-year strategic plan as well that we just are working on right now.
I was just about to say, like, you're tugging at my heartstrings right
Here
now because you have those 4 pillars. I know it wasn't just him. It must have been some of your executive leadership team that had extensive strategic planning. Love it. Couldn't be more happy. I wish more regulators should go through that exercise. Anyway, I'm sorry for cutting you off. That was my soapbox. Thank you.
He jokes that we get a gold star every time we talk about the 4 pillars. So I think I earn a gold star here today. But
hell yeah.
But we'll see. In all kidding, I mean, it provides clarity to the executive team about what our work should be focused on. Because absent that, there's a lot of things to do. This is a very early policy phase. These programs are very early. And so there are a lot of things that you could spend time focusing on. And these 4 things, if we only focus on these, we would improve the regulatory environment, we would improve our operations, and we could really move forward in a positive way. So those are our 4 focuses, not only this year, but for the next couple of years.
What's great about that too is the fact that that's also an external message. It sort of lets folks know, stakeholders, local governments, other partners, businesses, know that, look, if your priority is not one of these four, it doesn't mean it's not a priority for us. And I think to your point and Eric's point, like, it's also, some of these things can shift if an emergent, like if a valley pops up again, you're obviously going to respond to it, right? Like, so you have that ability, but at least points in a direction that says, like, these are the things that we're focused on. And so I used to joke, working for 5 commissioners, I always had 5 top priorities. And that was the challenge, was sometimes those things were in conflict. Sometimes those things were not in conflict, but were not exactly aligned. And I'm pulling in the same department on 3 different projects. So that's a distraction internally. I think, Christina, you nailed it. Like, there's a lot going on in cannabis policy that can easily become, like, today I'm working on this, but tomorrow is going to be a new project altogether. And the ability to start something and not finish it is sort of the burden of a regulator and the burden of a bureaucrat to try to harness all that. So, I know Erik loves a good strategic plan, but I think it's also helpful that that's being communicated externally. So at least you're setting those expectations that, look, we'd love to get to it. It is a priority, but we're laser focused on this thing right now. And until that gets done, at least where you stand in line, and that's, knowledge is power. So,
Yeah.
right, Erik?
Like, some of the points that we make over and over and over and over again go back to this. So the consumer access and awareness is a really big piece for us. We have more than 16 million Californians that live in jurisdictions that prohibit cannabis retail. And, when you've got a very confusing environment for consumers around where cannabis is legal, that I even need to know that cannabis is legal in certain places, having intoxicating hemp, having online sales, it is really challenging. And so when we hammer those points over and over and over again, I think no one's surprised too.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's super important work. I mean, Shawn, you nailed it. Just kind of setting priorities, because things can be things can be moving in 1,000 different directions, but it helps kind of set priorities, and not just with the executive level, in my experience, but even down to the frontline workers. It's super helpful. And this is actually a really good segue, because you have your 4 pillars that you guys are focused on, but there are other things happening that may not fit squarely into those pillars that I still think are worth discussing. And certainly coming off Canada last week, there was a lot of conversation around the hemp stuff, that November deadline, the new definition. There was conversations around rescheduling, medical, adult use. Will it happen? Won't it happen? What does that mean? I particularly found the conversation around, all right, Schedule 3, what does that mean for interstate commerce? California is certainly like right in the middle of that conversation with some of the work that your legislature did on creating triggers for when that world is a reality, specifically with some of those states in the Northwest. So outside of those 4 pillars, and maybe they actually fit into those 4 pillars, with all of this happening, what is California doing? What is the DCC doing right now, if anything at all, to kind of prepare for, or thinking about, or what conversations are happening if one day it turns out, all right, our legal read of this is that this is able to move across state lines? Are those conversations happening? Are we doing any type of preparing? I would imagine the answer is yes, but
Yeah. I mean,
Way to
I think
tee that up.
we're like many other states where we're trying to read the tea leaves here. And trying to stay focused on just understanding what rescheduling could mean in practice, and ensuring that we're prepared to respond accordingly. I mean, Canada was really interesting because in years past, that external stakeholder conference is really set up to hear a diversity of viewpoints. And so those panels get very spicy. People have very different views on things. And this Canada felt very different because not all panels, but a lot of the panels, there was sort of this consensus uncertainty where people were all sort of in agreement that we don't know what this is going to look like. And that felt very weird for a conference to me. But I think, from the get-go, we have been trying to wrap our heads around what this means. And I think trying to be as communicative as possible with licensees about where we are. So we've had a couple of licensee messages. There was a director message that Clint sent to licensees as well. We've done licensee listening sessions. And we are trying to be very clear that we do not know any more about this than licensees know. We are finding out, just like every other state regulator was talking about last week, we are finding out in real time, right alongside licensees, what this means. And at this point, we have more questions than answers about how this is all going to work. And I think one of the things that stakeholders are coming to advocate to us and to the legislature about is, well, we might not know X, Y, Z, but we should definitely be moving forward on this one piece that we can be sure of. And we have to keep reminding people that, like, this thing that you think that you're sure about, like interstate commerce is coming, for example, or something like that.
No, I'm positive it's
really
coming.
an assumption.
I know a guy that knows a guy.
Yeah. Everyone is like, well, I've heard, and so I'm very sure. And there is, and I'll say, even we as a department, we're like, okay, we've read this final order. Here's what we think it means. Like, here's what we think we should move forward on. And I think, to their great credit, both our governor's office and the legislature were like, hold on a second. They have been dealing with a lot of other policy areas for other state departments all year, where there has been dramatic federal action that either turns out to be not what you thought it was, and it's something entirely different, or there's some new guidance that puts you in a different direction, or it gets overturned in a court challenge, or it's for us in California, sort of uniquely tailored to not be beneficial to California. There's been a lot of that happening in other policy areas. And I think for us, we were reminded that, like, running too fast in any single direction is actually harmful to licensees, to the agency. Like, you could run very fast in one direction just to find out it's a slightly different thing that it ultimately ends up being. And you need to pare back everything that you've just done and move in that new direction. And that is a waste of resources and not helpful for anyone. And so for us, right now, what we are focused on is just helping licensees who do want to register within this short priority window that's closing in about a week here.
Exactly.
To be able to register. We're a dual license state or a dual use state where we have adult use and medical. The rescheduling order is only for medical. Our A&M designations on our licenses are virtually meaningless, except for at retail. And so we've been trying to figure out how to help people who, are operating in this environment where there are those designations, but there's not true market separation, figure out what application through the DEA means for them, and what they need just today to get their paperwork in order in order to be able to register, if that's what they want to do.
And I think that's the way you described it or gave that context is really hopefully helpful for folks that might be looking to their state agency and saying, like, what answers do you have? What answer, to the point being, we have a lot of questions as government, as regulators, et cetera. But you're also at least sensitive to the questions that industry is asking itself of what might happen. But it's also really grounding and a good reminder for everybody that has any speculation about what's going to happen is that we're seeing an awful lot of policy being either determined or set by courts today. And also, to your point, like, administrative agencies are running themselves, but sometimes in conflict with other federal agencies, and they're sorting it out at their level. And so none of this stuff is a foregone conclusion, but it's all got a number of hurdles that it has to overcome. And then obviously, as you guys at the state level are also wondering, what happens to our programs? What happens for our medical patients? How can we be supportive of them as a community, as folks looking to access medicine? And then, Erik touched on the interstate commerce piece. Is like, there's no doubt that California is going to be a contributor to a national economy in cannabis. There's a bit of jealousy as an East Coast former regulator myself that a lot of West Coast brands have made their way east through licensing deals, et cetera, but home base is still California. And also, I just need to acknowledge, I think the culture of cannabis in California is an exportable thing. It's IP, it's things like that. So to know that the regulator in California is at least sensitive to those things, I think is something that obviously industry should appreciate and know. But there's a civics lesson here too, which is your state regulator probably doesn't know what's happening, or let me clarify, doesn't have a ton of insight into what the federal bureaucracy is doing. And that's always been true. It's especially true with sort of our hyper political dynamics nowadays. And again, some of this stuff has nothing to do with cannabis either. It is very purely a political thing, or, the world itself is sort of on the agenda too, in many ways.
Yeah, and I imagine like especially so for this area because like I can only conjecture, but I imagine there are quite a few attorneys at the DEA who are looking at the court challenges that they are facing and
Mhm.
are maybe advising or intentionally not saying too much at this point to try and withstand some of those. I mean, I don't know. And so some of it might be a strategic decision on their part. But I think for us, that means that we need to be careful about what we react to and make sure that we're doing so with full facts so that we are setting up an environment where our operators are able to realize benefits. I mean, like, I think the things that we're really watching right now are, what does this IRS guidance look like on
Exactly.
280E? That's a huge thing for operators. So, waiting to see what that is, I think we'll want to make sure that California operators have opportunity to benefit from that, just like every other operator. And that's all before you get into, sort of these like what I think are longer term questions about, what does interstate commerce look like or what does international commerce look like? The
Exactly.
final order specifically called out international commerce. So we might not be there today. We are not there today, but I think it sort of teed up this environment where we're a step closer to that than we were before the order came out. And at least like there's some thinking that there's some direction there. And California is this sort of like legendary cannabis market. I think we grow the best cannabis in the world. There are a lot of people in the world who think California grows the best cannabis in the world, but like from a purely state economic perspective, we grow specialty crops. That is, we are a dominant agricultural producer.
Right.
We dominate specialty crops both in production quantity and in value. And this feels like it fits right in with that. It's not surprising that we grow so much cannabis in California because we have really good conditions for it here. And so, thinking about what a future world might look like in which that production has some place to go and how states who are interested in receiving that production might also interact with it is a really interesting policy area.
Mhm.
I think we're not quite there today, but it is a very interesting thing to think about. And our legislature was thinking far ahead at the time that they adopted laws around interstate commerce agreements where they outlined 7 things that those agreements needed to address, things like equivalent public health and safety standards, some sort of seed to sale tracking, some sort of equivalent testing standards. Like there was a list that they made, which I think is still very relevant today in thinking about what both export from the state looks like, but also what import into the state looks like.
Right.
So it's a good framework for us to think about what kind of standards would be needed.
Just want to shout out the Massachusetts cranberry for a moment as a specialty crop. And, we grow stuff too. Maine blueberries.
Potatoes too, baby.
All right. That's enough.
Big potato
Okay.
people up here.
Idaho would like a word, but okay.
Yeah, they can have it. All right. So TBD on the interstate commerce. When it all happens, we'll circle back, Christina, and get you on and be like, oh my God, what's happening?
She'll
Okay.
call you anyway. I'm going to have to
All
nudge myself into this.
That's right. So let's go to the regulator draft. Very on brand for the hybrid podcast. Christina's first time on. We'll certainly have her back, but we'll cover.
We've done one.
we'll draft. I feel like we've done 2 or 3.
We've planned like a bunch.
We just never get to them. All right. Well, you know what?
Since I've heard our trivia episodes, so
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Shawn, why don't you relax? All right, you're picking last now. So
Logging
the idea
off.
the idea is simple. It's pretty straightforward here. So, all right, everybody, calm down. I have to get through the ground rules. All right. So if you were to start basically a cannabis market from scratch, what are the most important policies to get right? Like, we're each going to get a pick. Actually, we're each going to get 3 picks. We'll do a snake draft. We can't do. Oh, I also want to do what Christina said. There, no duplicative picks. They have to be unique. And then as we make that selection, we have to give a little bit of context, a little bit of background on why we think that's a fundamental policy to have in place. And then finally, they need to be actual like regulatory or policy foundations or frameworks, not broad values like California's 4 pillar values or whatever we were calling them moving forward. So
she wants more gold stars. Yeah.
Starting cannabis program from scratch. We'll be drafting 3 different foundational policy aspects that would be deal breakers for us to make sure that program is successful. And since Christina is the guest, we'll go with Christina first. We'll go to Shawn for me, and then I will start round 2 and we'll go backwards. Does that sound? Are we all on the same page here? In alignment?
Let's do it.
I object to the draft order, but sure, yeah, that's fine.
Christina is on.
Sufficiently crush Shawn's spirit because he doesn't look very excited about this.
I wanted the last pick to get the first pick, but that's fine. That's all right.
No, Shawn will be fine.
I'll be fine.
Shawn lost the one and only other draft.
I chose the Pope.
Yeah, but you still lost. Christina's on the clock. Pick one.
Would you like a trade? I propose a trade.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll give you next draft's first round pick.
All right. I'm going first.
Yep.
Okay.
No pressure.
So I wasn't thinking about this as like one single bullet in regulations. I was thinking about this as like one sort of category of issues. So my first one is product standards. So I think the why for that is consumers need confidence that regulated products are safe and accurately represented. Like that is the fundamental role of a regulatory agency is to protect consumers. And so the sort of like sub bullets of that I think that includes is testing to screen for contaminants, restrictions on potentially hazardous product types or form factors, and accurate labeling so consumers understand what they are purchasing and consuming.
I mean, that feels like 6 or 7 or maybe 10 picks in one pick, but we'll allow it.
We will.
It's one category inside our regulation. So I think it's fine.
She took my whole draft.
I know. Maybe we'll go 2 rounds after that pick.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say rules? Like we have to have rules.
I pick laws.
Oh, wow.
That was awesome, Christina.
Any laws?
Any laws?
Just sure,
specific laws. What are the specific laws?
Ugh.
Product standards. I'll allow it.
Product standards.
So I guess to leverage the second pick here, I'll see what's left scraping the bottom of the regulatory barrel. And I'll be honest, I think to Christina's point too, I kind of looked at this broadly about building an agency or sort of a scheme as well. So it wasn't specific to regulations. And so I wonder if I can get some leeway here, and Erik will probably say no. But I think about the bureaucracy that needs to come with that environment. And so in my head, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking just fully funding your regulatory scheme and ensuring adequacy of the bureaucracy to begin the exercise, but also to scale alongside it. And leveraging something Christina had mentioned earlier about the 3 different agencies, there's a lot of logic to that, to have your agricultural experts have a hand in your cultivation rules, and to have your food prep and oversight and manufacturing bureaucracy have a hand in your manufacturing rules. And I just fear that I see a lot of regulatory agencies exist, but then sort of be starved into risk. And so I guess I'll ask the commissioner if fully funding a regulatory scheme is a permissive draft pick.
I mean, 2 minutes ago, no, but for the sake of the podcast and our listeners, I'll allow it. That's totally fine.
Okay, then I would say something else then.
Yeah, I think that's a very real thing. And maybe like you could call it broadly just operational readiness. I think this is the thing that people who
It's the
love
crisis comms
policy,
background.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I had this on my list too, and that's what I called it. But this is
Jackpot.
the thing that I think the like hardcore policy wonks miss sometimes is that like it doesn't. I mean, what you write on paper doesn't really matter if you don't have anything to back it up and like
Exactly.
go actually enforce it. And like having some sort of like clear administrative structure for being able to implement, like implementation is critical to policy. And like you can have a mediocre policy that's implemented really well and so net positive, and you can have an excellent policy that's implemented poorly and it's a failure. And so without that, I think you don't have much else.
I'm glad you pointed that out because we actually have a former Northeast regulator colleague where I would have that conversation with them. Be like, why are you putting that? Why are you putting those words in the paper? And they would say, because it makes sense. Like it's in line with our mission. I would be like, you can't enforce it. It's impossible. It doesn't matter. I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, it does. Anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. All right, Shawn. So fully funded money.
Operational readiness is the
Operational readiness. All right, so I got back-to-back picks here, which is good because they kind of go hand in glove here. My first one is a licensing system or process that doesn't pick winners and losers. This is something that I talk about all the time. If you're trying to get to the place where you launch the program successfully, simply, predictably, it's very tough to do these days, especially around the conversations around supply and demand. We were in the early stages where I had the luxury of having a system like that, and I thanked my lucky stars every time. But that's no lottery, that's no scoring. That's basically you hit these criteria, you get a license. And why? Because it's simpler, it's cleaner, there's less litigation. But then you run into issues on the back end, which is where my second pick comes in, and it's market supply controls and production management controls. And that's kind of another broad bucket. But with the foresight of having that more or less open licensing system. So when I say that, it's basically had the agency having authorities for moratoriums or licensing freezes, or the power of authority to downsize production, whatever emergency authorities. If you're starting to say, wow, this is getting out of control, our supply is far outweighing or outpacing our demand, what are things that we can do to control that? So those are, I went pretty quickly. That was my first and second pick. So one was the no winners or losers in your licensing process, and making sure, my second pick was making sure the agency has proper controls for production management. Because I mean, those two things, I shouldn't say those two things, that second pick monopolizes a lot of the conversations that I have with my state clients about, are we going to have enough? Are we not going to have enough? What do we do when this happens? And there are proven policies, initiatives, things that you can do that can help basically make sure that there are better outcomes in those regards in the state. So those would be my two picks. All right, nods. Yep.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, those are
All right.
picks. Yep.
All right, back
Those
to
are
Shawn.
picks, all right.
Those are picks. All right.
Are we doing 2 or 3 rounds? Did we settle on that?
Yeah, we can do 3 rounds.
All right. So
It's
that's
your
good enough.
show.
So I'll keep one in the pocket then. That's the reason I asked, is I have 2 in mind, and I want to see if I had another crack at this. But with that in mind, I would say a strong and clear administrative process as it pertains to enforcement. And the reason for that is, I think it gives the industry or the licensees a sort of a guidepost to ensure that they're being treated fairly, that there's an opportunity to have due process and get a fair hearing, but also evidence is collected, and just frankly, an administrative record. I think a lot of decisions get made, and the external expectation or suspicion is like, someone just doesn't like me, or they're out to get me, and at times, sure, that may be true, but also you broke the rules. And having that administrative process at least creates that record, but it also gives the courts an opportunity to engage in cannabis licensing policy, et cetera, and just brings, I think, a credibility to industry, but also makes it far more investable in a lot of sort of cascading downstream opportunities. So my pick would be just having a clear administrative legal process around enforcement.
pick. All right, Christina, you got back-to-back picks. Back-to-back picks,
No
Christina.
pressure.
All right, I've got two. So my first one is production standards. So thinking about worker safety. So I mean, like we talk about protecting consumers a lot, but I think a good regulated market also protects workers. And so to me, that includes things like safety requirements for extraction and manufacturing operations, hazard identification and mitigation, training requirements for staff, safety data sheets on hand, appropriate PPE, and then clear expectations for maintaining a safe workplace. And this one is important to me, maybe because I started in the manufacturing program and so many of our conversations were around extraction. We don't set limits on, what type of solvents you can use for extraction. And so one of our key focuses for inspections was to make sure that people were not going to blow something up. And like, that's a very real risk with certain types of extraction. But there are also smaller hazards that, you have to be attuned to. So everything from like flour grinding sets off a lot of dust. And like, what does that look like for the workers who are in the room? Do you have ventilation that accounts for that? Do you have PPE for that? So that's having safe product is really important, but it also matters that you're producing it in a way that is keeping your workers safe.
It's a big environmental justice element, especially the Northeast, a lot of old mill buildings, and it may not be the cannabis that's the hazard. It could be the fact that your 200-year-old building is next to a river and mold and all the other ththings. So
Sure.
great pick.
Yeah. Okay. And then my second pick is an informed consumer. I guess this ties a little bit into my, my piece about protecting consumers, but there are a lot of people in cannabis who are trying cannabis for the first time, or they're trying new product types, or they're trying it after not having tried it for several decades. And what they may have tried, in college, that's very different than what's on the market today. And so making sure they have the types of information that they need to make informed decisions is important. And so for me, what this includes is clear potency and ingredient labeling, making sure that allergens are disclosed, public education regarding safe consumption, safe storage at home, impaired driving, and any of the laws that they need to know. And then consumer awareness efforts that help people distinguish regulated products from unregulated products. And I think public awareness campaigns are probably the area that there is the most underinvestment in as these programs are set up. But it is so important to the success of the program, but also so that you don't have issues with youth accessing cannabis products at home, that parents who buy cannabis and bring it into their home appropriately understand the way that they should be storing it and what the risks are so that they can keep children in their home safe.
And it's also not a one-time thing. Like, I think some expectation of politically is we did a public awareness campaign. So we did that. And I think, there's kids born every day and they all need to be educated. And I think resources need to evolve with the maturity of your audience. And also we're seeing new stuff enter a market. What is Delta 8 versus Delta 9? What is HHC? All that stuff. And what's legal, what's not. So it's an investment.
I mean, the ongoing education piece, there's some really interesting campaigns from states right now around the World Cup because they have so many tourists in their state. And that's something for us that I think is worth us putting more thought into as we prepare for 2028 when the Olympics will happen in LA. And there will be this huge flood of people who are not from California, but who, might have access to cannabis for the first time or access to different cannabis products for the first time and need to understand what responsible consumption looks like during that type of an event too.
And shout out to Scotland for being one of the most entertaining visitors that Massachusetts and Boston have had. They drank Sam Adams out of Sam Adams. So always welcome. And the compliment from city officials has been they pick up after themselves. There's not they came, they made a mess, and they cleaned it up on their way out. So I think it's a great segue into 2028 for sure, as far as how these agencies across the country have handled public awareness. And I have seen those campaigns from another number of states. So um, my turn. It's my last pick.
Yep.
So I'm going to say, just because we're talking about cannabis, I'm going to say social equity and having a intentional plan and policy around social equity that I think respects the culture of cannabis, the history of cannabis, including the scars that are real. But also, and this is where I'm going to sort of zoom out a bit and make it more of a policy choice, is that that burden of social equity work is not foisted entirely or exclusively upon your cannabis regulator, but is a much broader policy across all of government, including economic development and things like records expungement. And again, just doesn't pigeonhole your cannabis regulator or cannabis licensing scheme to be the one end all be all for social equity. But that instead is you legalize this plant, that you respect that it has a history and not all of it is positive, and that many families still residing in your state have a history with the plant and exposure to the plant, but may not want the plant to be the solution to that, or the um, sort of the reconciliation of that history. So, but if you are going to start a new agency with respect to cannabis, then you join all the baggage that comes with that history. So just getting those expectations right, but being very intentional about it as well.
Nice pick. And then I will wrap it up with data transparency and public reporting. I could get on my soapbox about just data in general.
Look at the time.
I know you've heard me talk about it plenty of times, about how agencies should be using it to make operational decisions, managerial decisions, but also within their programs. What does our system look like? Is it healthy for compliance and enforcement? But I think for the sake of this conversation, kind of leaning into the public trust piece, and the integrity of the program itself, and the work that the agency is doing, having that data, making sure that it's transparent. I always wanted more and more stuff out there. Everybody can see what we're doing, can see the work that's going on in every single different division. But and then the public reporting piece, again, just kind of a collaborative effort here, making sure that we're doing everything on the up and up. So that's the draft.
Do we get draft grades now? Do we have to?
Yes, and they're coming from me. So
well, okay.
For Christina, we're going to call Christina Team Broad Buckets here. Product standards, production standards, and then I kind of put into like awareness campaigns or educational campaigns, because when I was thinking through the original purpose of this draft, the kind of that lens, what's the policy? It's the public awareness campaign stuff, but the informed consumer piece. Shawn came in with operational readiness.
Yes, I did.
A clear
Hashtag
administrative
trademark.
Process. Very sexy there. Very sexy pick, the administrative process. And then social equity. And then Gundy came in with the clear licensing process, the non-winners and losers, production management levers, and data transparency and public reporting. So I mean,
you just referred to yourself in the third person and also by your nickname. That was special.
So I don't know how we would grade these. I think we could probably just let the listeners chime in, add a comment, who you think won, who you think lost. I have my opinions, but I'll keep those to myself because I don't want Shawn to leave this grumpy.
Gundy grumpy.
Gundy.
Yeah. Let me just react very briefly, which is I think any one of those could be a first round pick and top overall pick, right? Like thankfully, these are not drafts in real life where any of your regulators of your program in any given state is worried about every single one of those topics right now and is juggling all of them. And but that just goes to show the breadth and the scope of the work that Christine is doing in California, that others are doing across the country. And so just let that be a reminder that every one of those has a stakeholder that is very passionate about each of those topics.
And in case, I mean, we have to come up with these. What's the word that I'm looking for here? Not
we didn't
caveats.
Exclude anything, right? Like this disclaimer there. Yeah.
Because somebody didn't say tracking doesn't mean tracking is not important, because we didn't specifically call out like I don't know, Christina kind of did testing. Like testing is still very important. It's supposed to be a fun draft where we talk about some of these cornerstone issues. It's not these chuckleheads are crazy. They left off all these different things. Just yeah.
So I mean, we're crazy. Like we are chuckleheads, but not for this reason. Like troll us for something else. I'm sure we're worthy of it.
Underused. Yeah, underused. Yeah.
Yeah.
More people should use the term chucklehead.
Yeah. Grandpa Gundy.
I'm going to start calling you guys that now.
You probably already have at some point. So
yeah, it's a good word. So with that, I think we can put a bow in this episode. Christina, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everything that you're doing for cannabis in California and larger. Thank you for your time. I don't know if I already said that. It was great to see you last week at Cannery. I wish we had more time to hang out, but I know all three of us had our own agendas and what we needed to accomplish while we're there. So hopefully we run into you again sometime in the near future where we're able to kind of just more casually hang out than, hey, what's up? And then have to keep moving on. You know what
do you want to talk about on the podcast? Okay.
Yeah,
sounds great.
Exactly. So Shawn, I don't know if you have any closing words, if we want to tease any upcoming episodes, guests.
Sure. Just want to add my thanks to Christina. I mentioned at the outset, but so folks fully appreciate having started in cannabis, evolved with the new agency, left and come back as fellow public servants. It's just really great that I love the chance to talk with people that care about it as much as we do and even more. And but also just one of the folks that, as I think about the policy people working on cannabis, you are first and foremost amongst them, is just being smart, thoughtful, super effective. And I'm just really grateful that you came back to public service because more people like you need to be involved and be engaged, but also be in charge and have a lot of confidence in how you see the entire landscape. You mentioned earlier the forest through the trees, and you're one of the folks that I think sees it very clearly. So glad you're recharged, but also glad you're back, and grateful that you would spend time with us chuckleheads today, hashing some of this stuff out, but also would love to have you back as this thing continues to evolve, because California in a lot of ways is leading a lot of these conversations. And two examples we used today were getting ready for rescheduling and the deployment of an AI tool, and you're doing so much more, but those are exciting developments that California is definitely going to leave a mark on. So thank you.
Well, appreciate you guys having me on, and glad that you have this space where it's two former regulators who know what this is like talking about these issues, because I think there's a lot of outside commentators who think that they know what the perspective inside government is, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that people in government are just people, and we're doing our best. There's a lot that you could come criticize us for, and that we are often criticized for, but I think just know that we are doing our best to try and balance a lot of different perspectives. I appreciate you guys sharing those out to the world, and for having me on. I look forward to coming back.
And I will say, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was one of our goals. I know Shawn leans into this one, is just, making it a little bit more human and letting people in, like, behind the curtain. So thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Like and subscribe. And I think, move to adjourn.
Bye, everybody.
See ya, everybody.
The hybrid. The hybrid. The hybrid.